He said he didn't remember everything perfectly, but the fragments of memory that remained were enough to make anyone doubt what they once believed to be true. That night, a heavy atmosphere hung over the courtroom hallway. No noise, no flashing lights, only tense silence as Nick Reiner appeared behind the bulletproof glass, his hands cuffed, surrounded by security. It was his first public appearance since the events that shook the Reiner family. But the story didn't end there. On the other side of tragedy was Rob Reiner, a director respected by Hollywood, who was facing the greatest challenge of his life, not on a film set, but within his own family. When fame, truth, and family ties clash, the line between belief and doubt becomes more fragile than ever. Before delving into the next developments, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any important updates. Your support is what motivates us to continue bringing you stories full of hidden aspects and depth. A major icon of cinema and social activism has passed away. Michelle Singer Reiner, his devoted wife and creative partner of nearly 30 years, is also gone. And at the heart of this earthquake, the name most frequently mentioned is their own son. But is this tragedy truly as simple as it initially appears? To the authorities, the story seems closed. To the media, everything seems clear. But for Nick, the truth is quite different. That night, things were far more chaotic than imagined, and very few details unfolded exactly as people have recounted. Let's try to go back to the beginning. A cold winter evening in mid-December in Brentwood. The wind blew through the trees, the atmosphere unusually quiet. Inside the Reiner family home, the decorative lights cast a warm glow, a peaceful family gathering. No one expected that just hours later, emergency sirens would pierce the night, the floor stained with blood, screams of agony would erupt, and 2 lives would be found lifeless. In the main house, the scene showed signs of severe violence, deep, clean wounds, yet brutally cruel. The study was in disarray, shattered glass lay near the fireplace, and a chair was overturned beside the grand piano. Every detail suggested that this was no random event, but one with a deeply personal element. Authorities arrived quickly. Nick Reiner, 32, was found there, barefoot, his clothes stained with blood. He did not flee, did not resist, and has remained largely silent since then. So why has this story remained so compelling after months? Because what was initially perceived as a family tragedy has gradually revealed more complex layers. The discussions quickly turned into speculation about motives. Rob Reiner was more than just a famous director. He was a man with intertwined relationships, both within his family and in society. And Tracy Reiner, his adopted daughter, was also drawn into the whirlwind of rumors, not just as a bystander, but as the subject of numerous different theories. The biggest question remains: for what purpose? This is not simply a heartbreaking incident, but a story of hidden secrets. In diary entries, audio recordings, and even whispers behind therapy room doors. What concerns the public most is the possibility that there are people who do not want Rob and Michelle to continue living in this world. In this section, we will examine the theories suggesting that Nick may not have acted alone, or at least not in the way the public imagines. His disjointed statements from detention caused a stir among lawyers and the press, especially his sister Romy Reiner, who was reportedly present during his final moments. But the shock wasn't just what Nick said, but also what he adamantly refused to admit, that things didn't go according to plan, and that his original intentions might have been entirely different. So what was Nick Reiner really like? The public knows Rob Reiner, the director of classics, son of the legendary comedian Carl Reiner. But Nick is almost a void in the family story. Few know that he lived in isolation in a guest house. Few mention him, perhaps because of his turbulent past, early addiction, multiple relapses after rehab, strained relationships, and a troubled youth. Rob tried to cling to hope, even inviting Nick to participate in writing projects as a last resort. But whether that effort was enough to save everything remains an open question. Some believe Nick was merely the weakest link in a far more complex chain of events. In the whispers behind the scenes, there's the theory that someone influenced, even manipulated, Nick, a man intelligent enough to conceal his emotions and traces. And when Tracy Reiner's name is mentioned in those assumptions, the motive immediately becomes a subject of debate. Was it money, power, family conflict, or something deeper? The reality is that there are many different theories, and each one carries unanswered questions. Back at the scene in Brentwood, a mansion equipped with cameras, sensors, and a state-of-the-art security system, the tragedy still occurred. The footage supposedly remaining in the lobby doesn't fully reflect what happened. Some sources say the equipment malfunctioned, others suggest the data was erased, and some argue that the truth will never be fully revealed. Why was only one camera working? Was it an unfortunate coincidence, or just a part of a larger picture that remains hidden? These questions, to this day, remain unanswered. Contradictions arose almost immediately. Nick claimed he was asleep, but a neighbor asserted they had seen someone of similar height and build walking barefoot in the backyard that same evening. Later, shoes believed to be Nick's were found in a trash can near the guest house, stained with blood. The puzzling detail was that Nick wore a size 12, while those shoes were a size 11. This wasn't just online speculation, but a detail documented in the records. So, who was actually wearing those shoes? Romy, the youngest daughter, was the first to call for help, and in a panic, the first to make accusations. However, just days later, she refused to testify, claiming her memory was failing, began psychological treatment, left the United States, and cut off contact with the legal team. When questioned again, she uttered only one sentence that stunned everyone. "I saw what they wanted me to see." Who were they? Who else was in that house? What sounds echoed through the walls on that fateful night? This wasn't a typical tragic story in the entertainment world. The picture that emerged was far darker. A son blamed, a daughter under suspicion, another silent out of fear, and above all, a legacy gradually shrouded in doubt. But what if things were viewed in reverse? What if Nick's turmoil wasn't the beginning, but merely the end of a series of events unfolding silently beforehand? What if this wasn't a spontaneous act, but the result of cold-blooded calculations? What if Rob Reiner's death had never been destined to be the focus of public attention? And when it unexpectedly became front-page news, what would the true picture behind it be? In this documentary, every detail of that night will be retraced. Every remaining trace, every time gap, every corrupted piece of data, and every word swallowed by fear. We will examine Nick's statements during his detention, analyze the theories surrounding Tracy Reiner's possible role, and clarify the contents of an unsent email with the haunting subject line, "If anything happens to me." These details are rarely mentioned, not because they don't exist, but because they are too inconvenient to be made public. And when all the pieces are put together, the big question emerges. Was Nick Reiner the direct perpetrator of the tragedy, or merely the easiest choice in a complex, orchestrated scenario? A perfect role in a calculated plan? To understand that, we need to go somewhere else, not the courtroom, but the final family dinner. It was there that the simmering tensions became apparent in every glance, every pause between polite conversations. Secrets were hidden behind glasses of wine, in seemingly harmless words. Rob cracked a joke, but no one responded. Tracy whispered, "After tonight, things will never be the same." No one understood her meaning. Not Rob, not Michelle, and not Nick, who sat at the end of the table, silently gazing at the plate of food before him. Tracy wasn't just saying it for the sake of saying it. To her, it was a certainty. That seemingly ordinary dinner became the key to a chain of events that would follow. A simple wish, a fleeting moment, but enough to mark the beginning of a night no one could have foreseen. If the last time the Reiner family gathered together was the starting point of the tragedy, then all the answers must begin there, and that is why that setting needs to be re-examined, detail by detail, in this story. One weekend evening at the Reiner family's Brentwood mansion, a large house exuding the quiet elegance of long-established wealthy families. Soft yellow light bathed the dining room, creating a warm yet reserved, somewhat distant atmosphere. The table was meticulously set with crystal cutlery and linen napkins embroidered with the family's initials, all reflecting Michelle's refined taste. It wasn't a holiday, there were no guests, just a family dinner, at least on the surface. Tracy arrived first, followed by Romy. Jake dropped by briefly, announcing an urgent work commitment, and left before the meal began, leaving a slightly somber atmosphere. Nick appeared last, looking weary, his eyes heavy, his hands trembling slightly as if trying to hold back something. Rob gave him a restrained hug, and Michelle gently kissed her son's cheek. Their gestures were complete, but the tension was unmistakable. It's often said that families don't fall apart in a single moment, but rather crack, little by little over the years. But that evening, everything seemed to surface because of tiny details. It started with a glass of wine. Rob raised his glass, smiling. For the family. Michelle clinked glasses with him. The others hesitated. Tracy raised her glass but didn't drink. Romy lowered her head to look at her plate, and Nick drained his glass in silence. A first sign of something unusual, though no one had yet named it. The shift became more apparent when the conversation turned to assets and the future. Rob mentioned rearranging the family funds, speaking as if it were just a fleeting thought. But the atmosphere immediately froze. Tracy froze, Romy held her breath, Michelle clutched her napkin. Only Nick seemed detached from the conversation, continuing to cut the meat in front of him without touching it. Tracy asked directly, "So who will get what?" Silence fell over the table. Rob replied in a calm but cold voice that everything would become clear. It wasn't reassurance, but more like a door had just slammed shut. Tracy forced a smile, asking another question half jokingly, half seriously. Rob responded with subtle sarcasm. Michelle tried to change the subject, asking Romy about his creative work. Tracy turned to Nick, hinting at his writing abilities. Nick didn't answer, only continued cutting his food, as if delaying something inevitable. Rob leaned back in his chair, telling Tracy to stop. She asked again, feigning ignorance, but everyone sensed the provocation. Tracy's voice was still soft, but each word was like a knife. Then she uttered a sentence that stunned everyone at the table, hinting at a secret that had been hidden for too long. The atmosphere immediately became stifling. Michelle was flustered, perhaps afraid. Romy dropped her plate. Nick finally spoke, just a short word, but it hung suspended in the air. Tracy stood up, calmly adjusting her shirt, neither crying nor raising her voice. Rob called her name, but Tracy didn't turn. She only whispered that after that night, things wouldn't be the same, then walked out of the room. These moments were never mentioned publicly, not by Romy, not by Nick, and not in any legal presentations. But for many, that very moment was the turning point. In the short time after dinner, the accumulated tensions seemed to explode, leading to a chain of unforeseen events. According to initial accounts, Tracy left the table to go upstairs to make a phone call. She said she didn't notice anything unusual. However, the house staff recalled hearing an argument from the study, interspersed with the sound of breaking glass and a loud noise that startled them. The house's security system reportedly didn't record the entire period, creating an inexplicable gap. Not long before, Michelle had tried to contact Tracy with a very short call. No one knows what the content was. Tracy didn't respond. Later, her phone's location was recorded in a different area, then the data was erased, and the device went into no contact mode. When she returned, law enforcement was already there. Meanwhile, Nick gave inconsistent accounts, sometimes saying he was asleep, sometimes saying he was working alone, and other times admitting to hearing screams before everything ended. He didn't explain how it ended, and it is that gap, what actually happened within the silent walls of the house, that is the most disturbing part of the whole story. Romy was finally found. According to a leaked investigative document, never officially confirmed but cited by many sources, she was the one who discovered both bodies. Rob was slumped in his office, Michelle face down near the fireplace. Blood splattered across the floor, a lamp was shattered, and a family photo frame lay broken at his feet. But the detail that sent chills down the spines of those reading the file was a piece of paper stuck to Rob's hand, written in red marker, containing only 2 words. No one knew who wrote it, and even stranger, the paper disappeared before the scene was sealed. Clearly, that night was anything but a family dinner. It was more like a heavy gathering, full of unspoken words, ending in a tragedy beyond all expectations. But the most controversial detail came from an outside source. A faint recording from a neighbor's security camera. A faint female voice, supposedly heard near Reiner's gate, whispered that Rob was not allowed to change the will any further. Then came a prolonged silence, followed by the sound of a car engine driving away. After that night, the Reiner family fell apart in ways no one could have predicted. Tracy disappeared from public life. Nick was arrested. Romy left the country. Hollywood, usually rife with rumors, fell silent. Calls from the press went unanswered. Famous friends offered only vague condolences before withdrawing. It seemed everyone understood that this wasn't just a story about a troubled son, but about a family built on layers of cover-ups and a truth no one wanted to uncover. Soon after, investigators shifted their focus to the guest house where Nick lived, a short distance from the main house, and it was here that the investigation took a different turn. The most haunting question arose. If Nick was close enough to hear the unusual noises, close enough to see the flickering lights during the final struggle, why didn't he intervene? Or was it because he knew he didn't need to? Inside the guest house, in a bedroom drawer behind a stack of unfinished scripts carefully wrapped in cloth, detectives found an old hoodie printed with the name of a familiar movie. Beneath it was a knife, clean, shiny, clearly used but without a trace. No blood, no fingerprints, not the murder weapon, but enough to make anyone who saw it feel uneasy. The property was quickly sealed off. Wire fences, police cars, a throng of reporters crowded outside. While the main house was the scene of the death, the guest house appeared like another world. Small, neat, deliberately decorated. The bookshelves were overflowing with scripts, therapy journals, medals from rehabilitation programs, a music player playing the same song on repeat, drawings stacked in the corner, cigarette burn marks on the carpet, and in the drawer, a black moleskin notebook, a few fountain pens, unpaid checks from Rob, and a long, serrated knife, the kind still used in the family kitchen, but not matching the victim's injuries. The notebook wasn't a confession. It contained imagined dialogues between Nick and Rob, conversations that never happened, about a son being exploited, about feeling marginalized, about everything finally over. What sent chills down the investigators' spines wasn't the writing itself, but the pages completely crossed out, as if something had been written and then forced to disappear. The guest house showed no signs of forced entry. No trail of blood, no disturbed furniture, no signs of panic or attempt at concealment. If this had been a spontaneous act of someone out of control, the scene would have indicated that. Instead, There was an eerie silence, as if the place were meant for waiting or for rehearsals. And then, amidst the papers, the detectives discovered a script with the haunting title, The Last Director. The plot revolved around a famous filmmaker murdered by his own son, set in the family's guest house. This coincidence shook all previous assumptions. The question was no longer what had happened, but was this script fictional or a draft of a pre-written tragedy? In the final scene of the script, the son enters the courtroom with a chilling calmness. He looks straight ahead and says a single sentence, "I didn't do it for myself. I did it for her." But who is she? The script doesn't name her. However, if you read carefully, the second most frequently appearing character in the story is a sister, a resentful woman who is excluded from the will, a woman who often whispers secrets behind closed doors. There's a line repeated many times. When he's gone, I'll sort everything out myself. Is it fiction? Maybe, but it's also possible another layer of meaning is emerging. The script is undated, yet ink analysis reveals that the lines in the final scene are still very fresh, as if they were written or edited not long after the tragedy. This opens up two possibilities. Either Nick wrote it beforehand, orchestrating everything like a cold blueprint, or he wrote it afterward, turning the story into a disguised confession. And then a third, more frightening possibility emerged. Handwriting analysis revealed two different pen pressure points, two different angles throughout the text. Two people, two hands. Someone had co-written this story with him, or edited it to steer it in a certain direction. Besides that, on the whiteboard hanging above Nick's bed, investigators found a line written in red whiteboard eraser. The truth is ugly, but it's my truth. Below it was a series of notes like a personal timeline, a planned dinner, a decisive night, then a morning just for recording. In the corner of the board, there was a separate line, Tracy's name accompanied by a reminder that she knew everything. Why would Nick write that? To reassure himself? Or to remember an invisible threat? Roy's initial testimony also began to reveal inconsistencies. She said she saw light emanating from the guest house and heard loud noises but absolutely refused to name anyone. When directly asked if it was Nick and a woman, she immediately turned pale and insisted she hadn't said anything like that. A small detail, but enough to make the detectives pause and reconsider the whole picture. In Nick's desk drawer was a highly encrypted USB drive. After much effort, a series of audio files emerged, self-recorded, therapeutic-style recordings of Nick talking to himself. One particular file was recorded shortly before the tragedy. His voice trembled. "Stop her. Everyone thinks I've lost control, but she's the one controlling everything. Maybe if they weren't here, she'd stop haunting me." The recording ended with heavy, drawn-out breaths without explanation. And then there was the guest house, where all the theories came back to. In the closet, there was a sealed box, awaiting trial. Its contents had not yet been released. A letter? A video? Or something that could completely overturn the case? Nick's lawyer simply stated, if the box were opened, everything would change completely. Investigators also found fingerprints of several people in the guest house, Nick, Romy, and Tracy. Most notably, Tracy's fingerprints were on the bedroom window, the window Nick claimed had been locked for a long time. So when was Tracy there? And for what reason? The guest house was more than just a place to live. It was more like a stage, where a confession was concealed, or where a meticulously planned scenario awaited its execution. And as the story shifted to Tracy, the atmosphere grew heavier. What was found in her black Audi Q7, parked just a few blocks from the building, changed the direction of the investigation. The engine was still warm. The car windows were fogged up from the inside. Inside the glove compartment was a carefully sealed envelope, labeled in red ink. "Read this if I die. So who was really behind it all? Who was the mastermind, and who was merely a convenient pawn in a complex game? The remaining clues in the guest house might hold the final key, not just to understanding what happened, but to knowing who truly held control from beginning to end. Inside the envelope was an anonymous handwritten letter. There was no signature, but the handwriting was believed to match Tracy's. The message was brief. "When this is found, the noise will stop. Let the silence begin." The words were vague, chilling, and seemed to be just the opening piece of the puzzle. Under the passenger seat, investigators discovered a blue velvet pouch. Inside was a single silver earring stained with blood, confirmed to belong to Michelle Singer Reiner. Tracy Reiner was Rob's adopted daughter from his marriage to Penny Marshall. She grew up in the spotlight of Hollywood, in a prestigious family with complex interwoven relationships. Tracy wasn't an outsider, wasn't marginalized, and was trusted. That's what made her presence so difficult to detect. The timeline began to become erratic. Tracy claimed to have driven straight home after dinner and stayed there all night. But the GPS data told a different story. For hours, her car moved around the family estate, even stopping across the east entrance, an area without surveillance cameras. Further discoveries weighed heavily on the case. In a trunk hidden under a yoga mat and a Chanel travel bag, police found a trash bag containing gloves and another knife of the same brand and size as the murder weapon, with traces of Rob Reiner's blood on the handle. That was enough to warrant a warrant, but not enough for a formal arrest. The explanation given: she said she picked it up on the side of the road, panicked, and put it in the trunk for safety. The investigators were unconvinced, but her legal team was strong. Tracy was released afterward. So what was the motive? Not necessarily money or desperation, but seemingly centered around control. Those close to her said Tracy had been arguing with Rob for months about the family trust. Rob wanted to restructure, reducing Tracy's share to allocate to Romy and Jake, arguing that Tracy hadn't proven her financial responsibility. Meanwhile, records showed she was burdened with significant personal debt from failed projects, security fees, and consulting costs. Her only lifeline was the Reiner family, and Rob was planning to cut that thread. A few weeks before the incident, Tracy sent Rob an email with the subject line, "Last plea. Please don't do this. Do you know what I'm holding? Do you know what I can make disappear?" The language was chilling. Rob didn't respond. The email was printed out, circled in red, and saved in a folder named Tracy Leverage. Authorities also obtained a recording of a short phone call on the day of the incident. Tracy called an unknown number. The person on the other end said, "He'll see this through." Tracy replied that she wasn't doing this alone. The call ended when the device was outside the Reiner estate. Tracy never mentioned the call, not to the police, not to the media. Her lawyer learned of it through a subpoena, and Tracy's reaction during the interrogation was described as out of control. She screamed, "Do you think I'm a monster? You don't know what he did to me?" Romy, her sister, provided a chilling detail. She said she was afraid of Tracy. At a crucial moment, Romy saw Tracy, wearing gloves, silently enter the study, just minutes before it was all over. Other clues continued to emerge. The family safe was open but showed no signs of forced entry except for a missing USB drive, which may have contained Rob's will, diaries, and audio recordings. Romy said Rob carefully stored everything digitally. If someone wanted to erase the evidence, they would have to erase the entire file. Tracy had studied digital forensics. She had the motive, the means, the access, and the resentment. The pieces seemed to fit together. Yet, there was no indictment, no charges, no trial. Why? Was power shielding her? Evidence manipulated? Or was there discreet assistance behind the scenes? One thing is hard to ignore. If Tracy was just an innocent witness, Why did she disappear for days? Why did her lawyer say she needed time to settle? And more importantly, when questioned directly, Nick said, "I wasn't the only one with blood on my hands that night. I just wasn't as good at hiding it as she was." Ultimately, the story returns to Romy, the youngest, quietest, first to discover the scene, and possibly the only witness to the whole picture. In a moment of vulnerability at therapy, layers of lies, calculations, and secrets may be unearthed. Romy not only witnessed what happened, she probably knew more than what was on the surface. Romy Reiner's call sent shockwaves through the city. On the other end of the line, her voice was broken, panicked, and her breath ragged. She repeated in terror, He did it! He killed them!" When the operator tried to explain, Romy burst into tears, saying desperately, "Something is so wrong. I heard them. Stop breathing." The words were haunting and hard to ignore. She didn't say she saw the bodies, but heard the moment life ended. This raised a chilling question. Had Romy arrived earlier than she claimed, been closer to the scene, or even been present when it all happened? Within her family, Romy was always described as a quiet, artistic, sensitive, and vulnerable younger sister, often feeling lost even in her own home. Close friends said she was quite withdrawn and rarely shared her feelings. But in this case, Romy becomes a crucial piece of the puzzle, and her silence no longer seems to be a personal choice. According to the initial account, Romy arrived at the family estate in a hurry, carrying her drawing supplies, telling the servant she would only be stopping by briefly. She was present at the meal, but before everyone finished, she disappeared. Romy explained that she went to her old bedroom, called a friend, and stayed there almost all night. However, the phone data reveals a disturbing gap. No messages, no calls, no trace of activity for an extended period. In an age where every connection leaves a trace, that silence is unusual. Another detail further darkens the story. The security system of a nearby house recorded the sounds. The gate opened. A woman's voice whispered with terrifying control, "Stay still, don't move." Beside it was another voice, very soft, almost swallowed. Then everything fell silent except for footsteps and then a sharp, clear scream of a woman. Audio analysis showed the scream matched Romy's voice. But this directly contradicted her testimony that she only discovered what was happening afterward. So what happened during that gap? No one could answer. During a later therapy session, Romy suddenly broke down. She said through tears that she heard another knife fall to the floor. She didn't want to look, but couldn't turn away. She stammered, confessing to seeing another person. "Not just him? I saw her." When asked, "Who was she?" Romy didn't answer, but every detail she described gradually led to the same name. Romy recounted that upon hearing the screams, she quietly went downstairs and peeked into the office. There were 2 people inside. One of them recognized her but let her leave. Why was a witness let go? Why was there no attempt to erase all traces? It's possible that Romy seeing everything wasn't a mistake, but deliberate, a way to sow fear and control. After the incident, Romy initially cooperated with the police, providing testimony, confirming the victim's identity, and participating in numerous interviews. Then suddenly, she disappeared. Her lawyer announced that Romy was in serious distress and unable to continue working with the investigation. Not long after, she left the country and was hospitalized at a rehabilitation facility for celebrities. When asked if she would return to continue cooperating, there was no response. Before leaving, Romy met privately with her godmother, a veteran actress who had been close to the family for many years. The conversation took place in an enclosed space. According to an anonymous source, Romy trembled, her face pale, saying she had witnessed something she shouldn't have seen. She asserted something that overturned all previous theories. Nick hadn't been involved. He was merely holding someone else captive. That statement, though whispered, shook the entire picture of the incident and raised an even more terrifying question. If not him, then who was truly in control that night? From the beginning, Nick has been portrayed as an out-of-control individual, a mentally disturbed son and the sole perpetrator. But if Romy's words are true, if she saw Nick embracing Michelle after the attack, that image is nothing like that of a murderer. Nick might not have been the aggressor, but rather the last person remaining. A witness, or worse, someone desperately trying to protect. And if so, the door to possibility must open. Perhaps someone else is the real culprit behind the tragedy. A darker hypothesis begins to emerge, sounding far-fetched but eerily plausible. Romy may have been forced into silence. Tracy knows Romy saw too much. There were no recorded threats, no direct messages, but Romy's subsequent actions make everything suspicious. Complete withdrawal, disappearance from public view, refusal to cooperate further with the investigation, and a brief departure from the country. Silence isn't always an option. Sometimes it's a survival reflex. There's another piece of the puzzle that few people mention: the voicemail Romy left for a close friend the night of the crime. Her voice trembled, low and somber. "I thought it would happen. I don't trust her." Who was she? Who had made Romy suspicious beforehand? And why did Romy believe everything was prearranged? This suggests the incident wasn't spontaneous, but may have been anticipated, even planned long ago. Don't forget the relationship between Romy and Michelle. They weren't just stepmother and daughter. They shared private moments of quiet, painting together, journaling, meditating. Michelle was Romy's refuge when things in the family became suffocating. Therefore, losing Michelle wasn't just losing a loved one, but losing her only source of emotional support. Since the crime, Romy hasn't spoken to Nick and has completely cut off contact with Tracy. When asked if she believed Nick was the killer, Romy just bowed her head, remained silent for a long time, then whispered, "I think he wanted to, but he didn't have the chance." That statement was incredibly important. It implied intent, but denied action. And if Nick didn't have the chance, then who did? Who was in the right place, at the right time, with sufficient access and sufficient motive? Romy clearly knew more than she said. But would she ever dare to testify, or would the truth be buried along with fear? While Romy left the scene, the evidence didn't disappear. Forensic experts began drawing conclusions that shook the entire original scenario. Blood told a different story, and in Reiner's case, that story didn't match the official testimony. Rob was found slumped over his desk, a deep wound to his upper chest, multiple stab wounds to his abdomen. Michelle lay a few steps away, face down near the fireplace, with 4 stab wounds and signs of resistance. Both were pronounced dead at the same time, but forensic estimates suggested they died considerably earlier. Rob's Rolex watch, a gift of great sentimental value, stopped at a time earlier than all reports indicated. This raises the question: when did the attack actually begin? Blood doesn't lie. It shows movement, location, the order of actions. But at this mansion, the bloodstains contradicted the story the police had heard. According to the initial account, Nick attacked both his parents in a fit of rage and then fled. But the bloodstains didn't support that scenario. Forensic experts found 3 different blood types. 2 matched Rob and Michelle. The third didn't. It didn't belong to Nick, nor Romy, nor any family member who had been tested. But medical records showed one person who matched perfectly: Tracy. This blood sample appeared on a metal object in the room, not the primary murder weapon, but identified as having been used in a separate attack. Worryingly, that object is not on the publicly released list of evidence. It's gone. Rob's blood was concentrated at the desk, with no signs of movement, suggesting he collapsed immediately. Meanwhile, Michelle's blood formed a path, extending from near the piano to the fireplace, as if she had attempted to leave or been dragged. This suggests her fatal wound may not have occurred where her body was found. The deeper we dig, the more the story deviates from the simple scenario of a single out-of-control killer. Someone was there, someone acted, and someone else is carrying the truth, choosing silence over speaking out. But the official report claims she died instantly. So what's the truth? Did she collapse immediately, or did she try to escape? To answer that, we need to go back to the scene and look at the smallest details. First, the footprints. Remember those long trails of blood leaving the research room? Initially, they were attributed to Nick. Large bare feet, long strides, suggesting a man moving quickly down the hallway towards the guest house. But as the forensic team analyzed them more closely, they noticed something unusual. There wasn't just one type of footprint. There were two different sets of footprints. The first set was large, clear, and showed a strong stomp. The second set was smaller, fainter, about size 9, clearly belonging to a woman. Most importantly, this smaller set of footprints left the research room and didn't return. There were no turning marks, no stopping marks. Someone had walked out of that room and disappeared into the night. And those footprints were stained with Michelle's blood. Next came the handprints. Luminol testing revealed a small handprint on the kitchen door frame. It didn't belong to Rob nor to Nick. The position was peculiar, chest high, slightly tilted, as if the person had been lurking behind the door, peering inside, motionless during the violence, then quietly withdrawing. No panic, no haste, just observing and leaving. If it wasn't Tracy, who else could have been in that position? Then came the detail that truly chilled the investigators. On Rob's laptop keyboard, there was a small, very fresh blood stain. DNA showed it was Romy's. The problem was, Romy had never admitted to touching the computer, but blood doesn't appear on its own. This indicated that Romy had entered the study, possibly after everything was over, seen something on the screen, and interfered. Then all the data on the computer was wiped clean and restored as if no emails, notes, or wills had ever existed. And in the entire house, only one person had the expertise to do it without leaving a trace. Tracy. But that wasn't all. Rob had installed an emergency alarm under his desk, directly connected to a private security company. System logs recorded a signal around 9:46 p.m. But that signal was quickly flagged as a false alarm. Who interfered? Records showed the person handling it was a familiar name in Tracy's dealings, someone with a shady history with outsourced security systems. The weapon used against Michelle also left an unmissable clue. The handle of the knife smelled of lavender lotion, a signature scent Tracy often used. This lotion was supposedly in her handbag, but it was missing when the car was checked. Tracy said she had lost it earlier. However, security camera footage from a gas station the following morning captured her discarding a small object into a trash can at 6:41 a.m. Its shape and size matched a bottle of body lotion. So what was she throwing away and why before dawn? Different blood types, inconsistent wounds, footprints that disappeared without a trace, a missing secondary weapon, erased electronic data, a disabled alarm. All these pieces didn't belong to a spontaneous act. They belonged to a plan. Someone knew exactly what to keep, what to remove, and who to take the blame for. And the final detail, quiet but terrifying. According to the investigation records, Rob Reiner was still alive after 10 p.m. That means someone stayed during that time. Someone decided what would happen next. But the GPS data tells a different story. Nick remained in the guest house until almost everything was over. If he hadn't entered the research room during that crucial time, how could he have attacked? So who attacked first? Who stayed behind? Who returned to finish the job? And let's not forget Nick's words during the initial interrogation. His voice trembled, disjointed, as if he himself couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. I saw him collapse. He was still breathing. I tried to stop the bleeding, but I was too slow. Was that the statement of a murderer, or of someone panicking, faced with a scene beyond their comprehension? The answer lies in a detail that forensic experts consider undeniable. Skin cells of a man were found under Michelle's fingernails. DNA results confirmed. It wasn't Nick. This completely changed the situation. It meant there was another person in that room, a character never acknowledged, and if so, someone has lied. Blood doesn't lie, but people do. So who do we believe? Nick, the son with a troubled past, easily becoming a scapegoat? Or the daughter who vanished without a trace, and the quiet sister withdrawn from all gaze, leaving no definitive testimony? The evidence is not only contradictory, it whispers of a more complex scenario. If this is a conspiracy, the mastermind doesn't need to appear publicly. He, or she, just needs to be close enough, understand this family well enough, and be patient enough to manipulate everything from the shadows. But it's not the blood, but the ashes that truly reveal the terrifying truth. In Michelle's office fireplace, investigators found half-burned papers. The fireplace was rarely used, according to the housekeeper. Michelle hated mess, hated the smell of smoke. But that night, the fireplace was lit, not for warmth, but to erase something. The charred pieces of paper, their edges blackened, not yet completely reduced to ashes, lay buried beneath layers of embers and burnt wood. They weren't random letters, but pages of private notes. The traces indicated a hasty, almost desperate act. When forensic experts collected and reconstructed them, they realized it was Michelle Singer Reiner's handwritten diary. Not a notebook she shared with anyone. It was where she recorded things she didn't want her children to read and probably didn't want her husband to know either. Much of the content was very mundane: shopping reminders, frustrations with the gardener, notes about intimate dinners with close friends. But then the tone changed. On one page, the handwriting became more shaky, the ink more emphatic. Michelle wrote that things were spiraling out of control. She mentions change, the feeling of betrayal, and especially a name that chills the atmosphere: Tracy. Michelle writes that Tracy knows, that she's angry, and that trust is gone. "I thought I could stop it," she writes, as if admitting defeat. Then comes a line that would send shivers down anyone's spine. Those eyes are different now, colder and more calculating. The final page ends with a short, vague, yet threatening sentence. It could be interpreted as a lament about marriage, but in this context, it sounds like a warning, a premonition of what's to come. Michelle seems to have seen the nightmare approaching and is trying to stop it just before things get out of control. But the GPS data tells a different story. Nick remained in the guest house until almost everything was over. If he hadn't entered the research room during that crucial time, how could he have attacked? So who attacked first? Who stayed behind? Who returned to finish the job? And let's not forget Nick's words during the initial interrogation. His voice trembled, disjointed, as if he himself couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. "I saw him collapse. He was still breathing. I tried to stop the bleeding, but I was too slow." Was that the statement of a murderer, or of someone panicking, faced with a scene beyond their comprehension? The answer lies in a detail that forensic experts consider undeniable. Skin cells of a man were found under Michelle's fingernails. DNA results confirmed. It wasn't Nick. This completely changed the situation. It meant there was another person in that room, a character never acknowledged. And if so, someone has lied. Blood doesn't lie, but people do. So who do we believe? Nick, The son with a troubled past easily becoming a scapegoat? Or the daughter who vanished without a trace? And the quiet sister, withdrawn from all gaze, leaving no definitive testimony? The evidence is not only contradictory, it whispers of a more complex scenario. If this is a conspiracy, the mastermind doesn't need to appear publicly. He, or she, just needs to be close enough, understand this family well enough, and be patient enough to manipulate everything from the shadows. But it's not the blood, but the ashes that truly reveal the terrifying truth. In Michelle's office fireplace, investigators found half-burned papers. The fireplace was rarely used, according to the housekeeper. Michelle hated mess, hated the smell of smoke. But that night, the fireplace was lit, not for warmth, but to erase something. The charred pieces of paper, their edges blackened, not yet completely reduced to ashes, lay buried beneath layers of embers and burnt wood. They weren't random letters, but pages of private notes. The traces indicated a hasty, almost desperate act. When forensic experts collected and reconstructed them, they realized it was Michelle Singer Reiner's handwritten diary, not a notebook she shared with anyone. It was where she recorded things she didn't want her children to read, and probably didn't want her husband to know either. Much of the content was very mundane: shopping reminders, frustrations with the gardener, notes about intimate dinners with close friends. But then the tone changed. On one page, the handwriting became more shaky, the ink more emphatic. Michelle wrote that things were spiraling out of control. She mentions change, the feeling of betrayal, and especially a name that chills the atmosphere: Tracy. Michelle writes that Tracy knows, that she's angry, and that trust is gone. "I thought I could stop it," she writes, as if admitting defeat. Then comes a line that would send shivers down anyone's spine. "Those eyes are different now, colder and more calculating." The final page ends with a short, vague, yet threatening sentence. It could be interpreted as a lament about marriage, but in this context, it sounds like a warning, a premonition of what's to come. Michelle seems to have seen the nightmare approaching and is trying to stop it just before things get out of control. Just one day before everything fell apart. Amidst the thin smoke of the burning pages, there was a strange, almost symbolic feeling. A woman trying to leave her last trace, transcending even the silence of death. Michelle may not have been able to prevent the tragedy, but she didn't give up. She wrote, she remembered, she pieced together names and details, as if believing that if someone was calm and patient enough, her truth wouldn't be buried with the ashes. What Michelle feared wasn't just the breakdown of a seemingly perfect family, but the possibility that the true story would be distorted, rewritten into a version convenient for someone else. She seemed to realize this wasn't a momentary outburst of emotion, but the result of a series of pre-planned, calculated actions. A plan she had a premonition she might not survive to expose. And then another haunting question arose. What if Rob also knew? What if he was the only one holding the final piece of the puzzle? The night before it all ended, Rob Reiner received a brief voicemail. No greeting, no explanation, just 5 short, hurried words. Maple was never a cipher. The message had almost vanished, but not entirely. When the data was recovered, investigators identified the voice as belonging to Billy Crystal, Rob's closest friend and companion for decades. They were not just business partners, but people who understood each other so well they didn't need many words. Therefore, the question wasn't who called, but why the message was sent and why at that particular time. A few days before the event, Rob and Billy had a private meeting. According to accounts, that meeting was unlike any before. There was no familiar laughter, no everyday small talk. There was only tension, hushed whispers, and a name repeated more often than usual: Tracy. For years, Rob and Billy had used private nicknames to speak to each other, a habit formed from a time when they had to avoid unwanted attention. Maple had once been just an internal, harmless, and private joke, but in this context, it was no longer meaningless. It carried a layer of information that only the two of them understood, or had once understood. The call was made from an unregistered number, registered under a pseudonym. A small detail, but enough to show that this wasn't a spontaneous act. It was a deliberate message, encoded in the very language of intimacy and shared memory, making it both difficult to decipher and unsettling. And from that moment, the story took a different turn. A place where no detail is accidental, where old memories can obscure the truth, and where answers may be hidden within things that seem to be just the past. Investigators summoned Billy Crystal twice in a row. During both sessions, he adamantly denied leaving any voicemails, insisting he hadn't spoken directly to Rob for days, aside from a few scattered text messages. But the moment the recording was played, his expression changed dramatically. He asked to leave the interrogation room. And just hours later, a team of lawyers appeared. That reaction made things heavier than ever. Why couldn't he admit it? What did that call contain that made someone accustomed to facing the public spotlight choose absolute silence? Could he continue to claim that Maple was just a harmless name, carrying no other meaning? The Reiner family didn't believe that. According to Romy, both Michelle and Rob had mentioned Maple in private conversations just days before their deaths. Michelle had hinted, if she brings, and Rob responded emphatically, Maple isn't what it used to be. It's become something else. So what did Maple really represent? A code name, a file, a location, or an unreleased plan? One theory suggests that Maple was the name of a hidden folder, a digital data repository Rob stored on his private server. According to later leaked documents, that area was wiped clean in a very short time after the tragedy. Notably, administrative access wasn't held by Nick, Romy, or Michelle, but by Tracy, who had previously managed data for a sensitive documentary project of Rob's. An anonymous former assistant revealed that she had overheard Rob talking to Billy on a call years ago. If I use the word Maple, it means I've found my footing. Perhaps that's Rob's way of marking off sensitive information, things he wouldn't share even with family. And if Billy says Maple was never source code, it could imply that the core code was actually extracted and hidden elsewhere, or fell into someone else's hands before Rob could act. So what secret is Billy keeping? And why is he choosing to remain silent? Some believe he's trying to protect Tracy. Others believe he knows more about the financial deals, the behind-the-scenes sponsors, or the sensitive projects Rob pursued. Whatever the case, there's no denying Rob is a highly influential figure, with a complex network of relationships and numerous hidden rivals. Among the personal notes found on Rob's iPad, there's a short but haunting entry. Maple Prime. If Maple was never the original code, and Maple Prime is a deeper layer, a different data layer, a different entity, or even a different person, then clearly what has been revealed is only the surface. And the truth quite possibly lies much deeper, waiting to be brought to light. But let's go back to that voicemail. When the detectives filtered and amplified the background audio, they discovered a detail that shook their entire initial assumption. There was a second voice, very faint, very indistinct, and definitely not Billy's. It was a woman's voice, soft, broken, uttering only one word, like a hurried reminder, like urging someone to call immediately. This discovery had a clear meaning. Billy wasn't alone when the message was recorded. So was he being coerced, afraid, or actively participating in a prearranged scenario? Did the other voice belong to Tracy? What remained were only fragmented pieces, a distorted message, a code name that may never have existed, a server wiped clean of all traces, a close friend stubbornly silent, and a family on the verge of complete disintegration. Each time it seemed they were getting close to the truth, another unexpected detail emerged. A new layer was peeled away, revealing a darker, more sophisticated and meticulously planned story. If Maple wasn't the source code, then what was the real core? If the code had been altered, who did it? Who had access, and why did they hide it so desperately? And most frighteningly, if that code wasn't in the computer, not digital data, then in what form did it exist? This wasn't wild speculation. There was someone who understood all the motives, all the schemes, and had been involved in this game from the very beginning. A game that lasted longer than anyone could have imagined. Even though the voicemail may have been deleted, the intentions behind it remained, echoing and leading directly to a name no one suspected: Nick Reiner. When Nick agreed to sit down for an interview in jail, his words completely overturned the course of the investigation. The man once seen as broken and out of control was finally the one willing to break the silence. No one expected Nick to be lucid or coherent. In the public eye, he was simply a collection of heavy labels: former addict, failure, the violent son of a Hollywood icon. For weeks he sat silently in his strict cell, his beard disheveled, his eyes vacant, avoiding eye contact. Then one night, without warning, he spoke. "I will speak, but only once, and only if it's recorded." A reporter from the Los Angeles Times was sent, along with a producer from a major online streaming platform. The door to the interview room closed, and from that moment, what had been buried began to surface. Thank you for watching until the very end. Please subscribe and like to join me in uncovering untold mysteries in upcoming stories. Every clue, every trace, could change how we perceive the truth.